Every generation seems to have a claim to fame or infamy. In the 1980s, computing made great leaps forward. Microsoft introduced Windows, the NES was released, and so forth. Then we had the dawn of mainstream internet and the 3D gaming of the 1990s. In the aughts, we had the rapid growth of broadband internet and mobile devices. So what about these days? Are we in a rut? Have we passed through the interesting times into a more boring and stagnant period? It occurred to me the other day as I was playing an indie game how we're actually in the middle of another special period. We're in a golden age of cheap, quality digital media. Specifically, but certainly not limited to, games. Just think about it for a second. In the 1980s in America, which is hardly known for its high prices on retail products, you'd pay $50 in 1980s money for a Nintendo game, and it wouldn't seem too outlandish. They were fun games at the time, and you had to judge them by what had come before, which is to say, not much else. Cut ahead to the 1990s, and the internet began to emerge as a fairly common household service. Sure, for most of the decade, and for most people, it was just dial-up, but even that really opened up people's horizons. The cliches don't need to be rehashed here, but suffice it to say, it was a transformative technology. Also, and more on point for gamers, you also had the shift from two-dimensional sprites to textured polygons. The graphics of Tekken or Ridge Racer may not seem like much these days, but at the time it was a dramatic leap forward, especially considering the other advantages provided by CD media, such as the game's high-quality soundtracks. In the 2000s or the aughts, we saw another big development. Broadband internet opened up more than just text and the occasional MP3 download. Videos could now be distributed online and without difficulty. Games could be downloaded without having to go to a brick-and-mortar store. The other big shift from the aughts was the advent of mobile devices. False starts such as PDAs from the early aughts didn't really slow down the mobile revolution. The release of the first iPhone was probably the high watermark for this transformation, but we have to include the release of mainstream tablets such as the iPad as well. Steve Jobs really owned this decade, and rightly so. So where are we now? Are we at the end of the road? Hardly. Getting back to what I talked about earlier, what we're seeing now is a golden age of cheap, high-quality digital media. This includes music, this includes videos, this includes games. Music, well, we have services like Spotify and iTunes, but there are certainly others. Pandora, for instance. Video? Sure, there's still a lot to producing quality content, but the competition for distribution is key here. Consumers now have a choice of Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, and a whole host of other free channels using devices like Roku, Chromecast, and Apple TV, among others. And let's not forget YouTube, which you're watching right now for free. Now let's talk about games. Cheap games. As a gamer of many years, I can't begin to tell you how good we have it now. In fact, I'd say we have it so good we're really spoiled. And I do mean that. I think most of us at some point have had to catch ourselves when complaining about the Steam holiday sales or Humble Bundles not quite giving us enough value for our hard-earned $5. These days, I guess that might be a somewhat fair complaint, but just going back to the early 2000s, who would have ever thought that we'd have such fire sale prices on a regular basis? It's not like we're having to scrape the bottom of the barrel for cheap games either. You'll consistently find AAA titles being sold off at insanely low prices. Games like Far Cry 3, Fallout New Vegas, Deus Ex Human Revolution, and XCOM can all be had if you're patient at really, really low prices. Then there are the indie games. Distribution through Steam and elsewhere has made small developers much more visible and viable. Sure, there's a problem with the sheer volume of pretenders to the throne, but the good games typically make a name for themselves. Even the big evil corporations running the major consoles have gotten in on the act, securing exclusive rights for the most promising of these indie games. And just think for a moment of all the must-play titles of recent years that might not have seen the light of day in the economy of yesteryear. FTL, Limbo, Terraria, Star Sector, The Binding of Isaac, Splunky, and Minecraft. Minecraft sold for billions of dollars. It's really the rags to riches, quote-unquote, American dream story, except of course it involves a Swede. So why is gaming so cheap? I guess you have to attribute it to a number of factors, and not just one magic reason. First, there's the competition I've already mentioned. You'll have people chasing that Minecraft dream. Some succeed, most don't. They're pumping out all of these games, and even if only a few of them are really showstoppers, that's still a lot for gamers to choose from. And they can sit on the market for full price for only so long, unlike the overpriced, aged LucasArts titles from the mid-90s, to give one example. Tied into that is the competition among distributors. Steam, GreenManGaming, Origin, the Microsoft Store, the Sony storefront, the Humble Bundle, Good Old Games, Amazon, and others. They're all competing for your dollar, and the pressure is on to keep their prices low. That works for me. I don't know about you. And there's also the tools available to developers now. I don't claim to be a wizard about how these things are produced, but I do know that photo, sound, and video editing software of a very high quality can now be had for affordable prices. If you check recent news, you will see that the Unreal 4 engine has been made available for relatively minor royalty fees to would-be developers. Development kits themselves seem to have improved dramatically as well. We've got a whole host of game engines for developers to use to save time and presumably money. So again, I'm not an expert, but it does seem a lot less difficult than before for small development teams to stand out on their own. I won't say easy for them, but certainly less difficult. I have much respect for the skill, dedication, and feverish work that goes into even the most unnoticed game projects. Diminishing returns has to be a final factor. I'm not an alarmist who's saying that innovation is dying out, because it's clearly not. But from a pixel-pushing standpoint, you can sit on a console or a gaming computer for more years than you could in the past. Console cycles aren't getting any shorter. Intel isn't doubling its processing power quite as frequently. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Games have more staying power and don't look quite dated quite as quickly. This leaves us with a more robust selection of games that feel more with it. Maybe this last factor is a bit of a stretch to explain cheap gaming, but I think there's at least something to it. So there you have it. Cheap games, quality games, innovative games. Life's pretty darn good for gamers right now. So add some money to your Steam wallet. Keep an eye on the Humble Bundle, or load up a Twitch channel to find out what games are out that might appeal to you. Chances are you won't have to spend too much money to buy them.